Hello, everybody. Hey, welcome back to Bring It All Back Home. I'm excited to get into a new episode for you this morning. This one's called Peter Lindbergh, Unlocking a Perfect Portrait. So I'm looking to take a dive into what we can all gain from taking a look back at Peter Lindbergh, his style, his technique, but more importantly for this episode, really nailing the episode to just one photo. So I'm going to get into the history of the photo, what I could uncover online, and there's a little bit of a mystery pertaining to a certain lens as well. So if you're into black and white, if you're into analog gear, if you want to get some maybe refreshing inspiration when it comes to portraits using all that stuff, Tri-X, classic cameras from the 90s or even 80s, and really seeing why a particular portrait was so successful. Yeah, come on into this episode, tune in, turn on, grab some coffee, whatever it works for you. And yeah, let's jump in. So we're dialing it back to 1994. The location of the shoot is in Long Island. Wasn't exactly specified where in Long Island. On a farm. The photo shoot was something that Peter Lindbergh was doing for Harper's Bazaar. And it turned out that the original subject had to cancel at the last minute. So they got instead this upcoming, very, very young British model who you guys I'm sure know, whose name is Kate Moss. So this is one of the earliest major shoots for Kate Moss, and it took place in a couple different locations. There was some stuff in Rome, and then part of it was this location in Long Island. So yeah, it's all about this particular photo. I'm going to leave a link, of course, to this photo. I'm going to have a shot of it in the episode photo, and I'm going to leave a link to one of the more recent auctions of an actual limited edition print that Peter Lindbergh had done. So I'm going to get you guys, a really high resolution link. And that's where it starts. So let's go all the way back to 1994. So what's not to like about Peter Lindbergh? There's so many things to like about Peter Lindbergh, especially coming from the analog gear community, people who still love shooting Tri-X, people who still love portrait photography. One of the comments that I managed to find from a YouTube video many, many years later with Kate Moss was that she just immediately came out saying she adores Peter Lindbergh, she loves him, but that he was so unpretentious. And then she literally kind of whispered to the interview, unlike blah, blah, blah. So yeah, Peter Lindbergh, very unpretentious, really a kind and generous person who formed a bond with the people he worked with, as well as, of course, the professional models. What I want to get into first is, well, where the heck is Peter Lindbergh coming from? So I'm going to leave another link to two more articles that really give you lots of resources. There's actually a great amount of information on YouTube. He just passed, 2018 or 19. So a lot of the stuff was interviews and things that he was doing as his career progressed and as he got closer to his late 60s and 70s. But this is really at the peak of his career. His career was absolutely peaking in the late 80s and the first half of the 90s when his style became renowned. So one of the things I want to establish about Peter Lindbergh was that, from what I've read, he wanted to become an artist. That was his first goal. He wanted to work in art. But at some point, he kind of pivoted and instead took a position as an assistant where he came from Germany. and just learned commercial photography, learned anything he could do. He worked on just anything he could do to start his career. Wasn't in any way focused particularly on fashion, even necessarily portraits. But from what I understand, he did some black and white portraits of his niece or nieces, his brother's kids, and used them to help get his way into another job. And essentially, he started doing black and white stuff in Germany, and then eventually got invited to Paris to work more seriously. And then suddenly his career just blew up, and he was quite in demand. Now, one of the things he never really wanted to embrace, although he sometimes shot in color, he just wanted to keep going with black and white. That was his vibe. That was his aesthetic. And he was asked, he said in a lot of interviews, he kept getting asked, especially with the explosion of color and indoor lighting and the real glamour look of the late 80s, 90s. Why did he keep working in black and white? And yeah, I'll leave a link to some of his interviews, but yeah, he kept, the answer kind of kept evolving for him. But I think for one of the ways you could break it down, going back to the sort of his personality, was that he felt that black and white was getting rid of a certain degree of artifice. And he, even though black and white, and he kind of debated with this answer, black and white, is it getting us closer to reality? Is it another kind of reality? But yeah, he kind of felt that with black and white work, particularly for these editorials, these spreads in these high-end fashion magazines, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, that it was bringing the people back down to earth, and you could kind of see them in a different way. And I think in general, I think as you look through his work, I don't think today, let alone even the last 2 decades, I don't think anybody would even question why he's still working in black and white. It's just so beautiful. His stuff it speaks for itself, how wonderful the black and white works for his portraits. So I want to start now with the techniques and essentially the gear, but then, go in a little bit deeper and maybe come back to the gear because there is a little bit of a mystery. So if you Google or do the AI, Google Gemini, they're going to kind of lay out that there were some, truths about his style when it came to his gear, that he typically shot with Nikons, and he also used Pentax 6.7s for medium format, and he very rarely did anything with a tripod. He loved the spontaneity of shooting, especially with his Nikons, free and easy, and there are videos of him chasing down models on the beach, just with a motor drive, just firing away with his Nikkor. I think it was like a Nikon F3 with those original motor drives. And you might think, yeah, there it is. Peter Lindbergh just, refrain from using a tripod and go out there and just hand hold those shots. The other thing it's going to also state is that he loved using the 105 lens with his Pentax, of course, the classic normal 105, which is often referred to the reason you get into the Pentax 6.7, because there's that magic 3D pop, as they say, when you shoot the 105 either wide open at 2.4 or maybe even stop down to 2.8. And that's all you need to know, right? I mean, he shot Tri-X, he shot with Nikons, and he shot with occasionally with this classic 6x7. So what I learned trying to go a little bit deeper is, first of all, a major misconception is that he did everything handheld. There are many, many videos of him working, sitting down with a tripod, with both the original cameras, but especially even as he kept shooting Nikons into the 90s and the noughts and the teens. Yeah, no, he sat down, he used a tripod. So the whole idea that you have to sort of imitate Peter Lindbergh, or I'm not suggesting that this is a let's imitate Peter Lindbergh, let's take inspiration from Peter Lindbergh. That was part of his photography. And I think what what is true, it was the part he enjoyed the most. He liked the mistakes. He liked the spontaneity of not being tied down to a camera that's going to need to be reloaded or swapped. And there is actually a video that I did find of an assistant coming over and swapping out the 6.7 because, of course, you only have 10 shots, you know? So, yeah, it is true that he preferred the discovery and the spontaneity with shooting, say, a motor-driven Nikkor, a Nikon F3, F5, F6, whatever it was. And then, of course, getting into digital where he didn't have to worry about any of that stuff, changing film. But more specifically, this picture, this unlocking a perfect portrait, what struck me as I was looking at the photo was I just don't think this was shot on 35 millimeter. And I'm like looking at it going like, yeah, no, the way the fall off of the out of focus elements and it does have a little bit of a 3-dimensional feel to it. It's most likely not 35 millimeter. It's not the Nikon, but I couldn't find proof. I could not find proof that it was 35 or medium format. Well, the first unlocking for me was I did find an article, which I'm also going to link to, where this incredibly low resolution image showed 4 frames from one of the contact sheets with Kate Moss, and it was obviously a medium format contact sheet. So that was the first thing. He did shoot medium format, and I am gonna stake my guess on, yeah, he was not doing this handheld. So my guess is, yeah, he had the 6.7, had it on a tripod, and Kate, and as part of this shoot, was positioned just almost directly against this barn wall. One of her shoulders is practically touching the barn wall, so she's really close to this barn wall. It just has a nice, even amount of texture to it. It's old wood as the background. And then it became, well, what's the lens? Because if he was shooting with the 104, it would seem that, especially where people typically shoot it, if he was shooting at, say, 2.4, the background blur would be way more pronounced. And the background blur, as you guys know, if you do use the 105, has a certain kind of look to it. And then again, if he wasn't shooting at 2.4 or 2.8, if he was shooting at f4, then there would possibly be more less limited amounts of the sharpness, meaning that if he was shooting at f4 on the 105, as I look at the print, I would guess that a little bit more of her nose and a little bit more of her mouth would be as sharp as her eyes. So that's still debatable. I want to come back to that. What's so riveting for me for this shot is just how simple it is. It is a simple portrait. I mean, there's many, many interesting things going on with Kate Moss's pose, and everything relies on the way she's gazing into his lens. She's giving, in this particular shot, she's absolutely staring straight into the lens. Her body is postured just a little bit of an angle. She's just sort of turning one of her shoulders a little bit back, so her shoulders aren't just straight on. Her right shoulder is angled a little bit back to the wall. But yeah, it's her youth. It's her expression. Her face is absolutely relaxed, but everything in her eyes is conveying a mood, an emotion, and something really that's unique about her at that point of her life, still a teenager. And yet she seems very mature in the shot too. It just has so many amazing levels to her expression. And there's a bit of mystery to it, you know? So does it matter to figure out which lens Peter used in this shot? I can't help but want to know. So with the deep dive, I found this website that is all about this original exhibition that was done, also coupled with the book. The book is still available, Peter Lindbergh, A Different Vision on Fashion Photography. And the article is nice and long. It's from a website / magazine called Dutch Aperture. And yeah, it's referring to this exhibition coming to Rotterdam, in Holland. And it's literally a first-person description. I visited this show, Peter Lindbergh's great show, first major retrospective of his work. And the article, as well as the exhibition, I'm sure, kind of goes into his biography. It goes into where he started, some of his technique, talks about his inspiration. And then as you scroll a little bit past halfway, suddenly, again, not super high resolution of a photo that I can't double click on it and get it bigger. The image is somewhat dim because it very much has this museum lighting, but in a very large cabinet covered with glass, inside this exhibition display are 6 Peter Lindbergh cameras and 6 different lenses. So this became okay, here we go. What is he showing off here? So in the image, you have some boxes of Tri-X, you have a light meter, you've got a notebook with Peter Lindbergh's sketches, and it divides it up. On the right side are some Nikons, including that cool F3 with the motor drive, which there is a video of him using. There's an older F2 with a motor drive. And on the Nikons, pretty much you're just seeing 3 lenses. You're seeing the 50, the 85, and what looks to be the 135. That one last one I can't make out completely. But on the other side, what kind of Pentax 6.7s are we looking at? So this is where it gets fun. Now, first of all the Pentax 6.7s have the traditional grip. They have the wooden grip. Perfect. All of them that are on display here are not the earliest versions. So these were the upgraded versions. These are the 6.7 2s, so these are, I guess, the later ones. But what kind of lenses are on there? So this is where I kind of did a screenshot and then tried to adjust for the contrast and the brightness because, again, it's a really dim image. And where I went to next, this is where it was kind of easy, actually, was the Pentax forums. So the Pentax forums is a wonderful group that gives you reviews about sharpness, aberrations, bokeh, handling, value. And what's so cool about trying to nail what lenses are on these cameras is that it's really obvious right off the bat that none of the lenses are the newer versions. So just like the way Nikon and the Nikkor glass, those original pre-AI, had that unique kind of scalloped focus ring, where it wasn't like this modern look. It just had that really indented look, Well, that's all 3 of the lenses here. All 3 of the lenses are the original 1971 versions of the Pentax 6.7 lenses. So that really narrowed it down. And then all I had to do was just really zoom in. It's getting grainier and grainier, and just look at the body. So one of them looks like it is the 105. That's the one that's kind of facing away from the photo. But the other 2, it's a perfect look. And this is where they're actually identical. There's 2 of the same lens. And what's so unique, as you get closer to the edge of the lens, the nose of it, they have these white markings on them. And just adjacent to that white marking is a vertical white line. So I'm going back to the Pentax group, and I'm just trying to find an image of that. And lo and behold, I get a supersized image. And what is the lens that absolutely matches that? Well, it's not the 105. It's the Pentax Macro 135. So that's one of the things that was a huge revelation for me. And this is where I'm thinking, well, maybe this was the lens. So what they describe on this, and it's supposedly not a full macro. It's not going to give you like the 1x1 perfect macro stuff. But the lens is described from the Pentax forums is that it is a manual focus close-up lens introduced in 71. And there was a later version that was updated in 89, and Mr. Lindbergh did not bother updating it because supposedly it was just a cosmetic rebranding of that later version. It has a magnification of 0.31. It is more of a close focusing telephoto. So that's also one nice thing about it too. It's close focusing, and the lens is praised for its sharpness across the aperture range, low distortion, and the bokeh is described as Helier-like with a gentle fall off and a pleasing background. And this is where I wouldn't mind just going off on a little bit of a tangent. What's so cool about this discovery for me is that when you look at film, medium format cameras, and I'm going to leave aside Hasselblad right now, but let's just talk about Mamiya and Pentax. You know, for the last at least 10 years or more, many, many people have rediscovered medium format film, and it's a kind of, do I go the big Mamiya RB or do I go the Mamiya RZ? And what are the two most common lenses that are the go-tos if you want to do something other than wide angle? Like, you know, if you don't need to be shooting landscapes with it, if you're looking for street, if you're looking for environmental portraits, if you're looking for, you know, something a la Willem Verbeek, you know, what are the typical lenses? There's really just two with the Mamiya. There's the beautiful lightweight 2.8 110, a fantastic lens. There's a guy I still follow on Instagram who I've been following for over 10 years, and that is his only lens. And he absolutely delivers so many beautiful film portraits, shooting at 2.8 on the Mamiya RZ 110, you know, and really these, if you want to kind of find their equivalent 35 millimeter focal lengths, just divide it in half. So that's equivalent to relatively a normal lens of 55, but with all that medium format depth of field and that 3D pop stuff when you're shooting it close to wide open or at wide open. The other lens, which is really, really popular, especially from Willem, is the 90. The 90 lens for the Mamiya RZ. Terrific lens. Again, a tiny bit wider, closer to a 45. And yeah, you could do practically anything you want with the 90. It just gives you that really flexible focal length where you can still use it for portraits, but you can get a bit more in without going all wide angle. So yeah, a lot of classic Willem Verbeek stuff from Wildwood. He's just stepping back with the tripod and getting beautiful, beautiful architecture in, but he's not going ultra wide. He's not even going regular wide. He's not shooting the equivalent of 28 or 35. It's equivalent of 45-ish, you know? So those are the go-tos. Everybody knows about the Mamiya lenses, and on the Pentax side, the only lens anybody ever talks about, and rightfully so, is the magical normal 105 2.4, because the way the Pentax lens renders colors, the way it renders contrast, but most of all, the way it gives you this 3D look when you shoot wide open or at 2.8, it has absolutely unique character to that lens. And there's Gabe Sachs was saying that somebody had recommended, and it might even have been somebody who worked for Herb Ritz, had just said, look, just get the 105 and the Pentax 6.7, and that's you're golden, because that's what he did practically all of his Rolling Stone 90s and late 80s photography portrait stuff with. It's a go-to lens. So why did I bring this up as a tangent? Because there's something left out. There's an unlocking here that's been left out. In the 80s, another extremely busy photographer who also embraced Mamiya, and again, you can have your opinions about her, whether or not you've liked her recent stuff may make you want to choke. But yeah, Annie Leibovitz in her day when she was shooting nonstop covers for Rolling Stone, and then what? I guess she switched to Vogue. Was Vogue her big jam? You know, all of her classic stuff in the 80s, the majority of it was shot on the most obscure frickin' lens that nobody talks about. And that's this 140. But you can discover it if you read one of her books. One of her books is just basically her singing the praises of this lens multiple times, and how once film was being phased out and Mamiya's sort of became unworkable, she misses it. She really misses that particular look of that lens. It kind of brings it all home for me, because it is in many ways not shocking that this photo, which I wish I could find the original, I wish I could find just another version of it. I found one other Facebook group that mentioned, just with no backing up at all, that Peter Lindbergh favored the 135. It is a beautiful, it's a little bit close. Just think about it. Like, so Annie Leibovitz is favoring the medium format 140. He's favoring the 135, just a little bit more formal, a little bit more of a portrait lens. And then there's all about the sharpness, and I think that's where I want to just go in a little bit more about the technique here on this particular photo. I've been getting into printing. You guys may have noticed if you've checked out the last 2 episodes, I wanted to jump into some matte paper, and I started printing my medium format black and whites, and I started looking for ones I hadn't looked for in a while, like what are all of my Tri-X black and whites? And lo and behold, I found one of my original rolls going all the way back to 2016, and for some reason, this Kate Moss Peter Lindbergh photo was mixed in with it. So I think at some point many years ago, I had done some Googling on Mr. Lindbergh and found this photo and fell in love with it, and it's dropped it into that collection. Anyhow, that's how I sort of randomly ran into this photo again. I was looking for photos to print. So what I did was, let me just print Mr. Lindbergh's photo, this perfect shot, on this matte paper with my Canon 300, see how it looks. I printed it out, and it has absolutely become my favorite print. It's just setting my brain on fire every time I look at it. So it's like part of the reason was just technical at first. I just wanted to see, is this matte paper pretty good? I've done a couple prints from my photos. What happens if I just print out this Peter Lindbergh photo, and I print it out, and I'm just like stunned. So yeah, it is my the very cheap matte paper from Canon pretty good? Yeah, it's fine. It's just fine. Is this photo from Peter Lindbergh now in my hands something I appreciate even more? Absolutely. So yeah, like, do you really know a black and white photo if you're only viewing it on a monitor? And I think I mentioned this, last week, or 2 weeks ago when I did the last episode. There's something about having a black and white print in your hand on the wall, seeing the tonality, having it right there. So getting back to the perfect photo and getting back to the technique, what I noticed immediately about this photo, and which made me go back to every single one of my Pentax 6.7 photos, was that Peter Lindbergh nailed the focus precisely on her eyes. And Kate Moss basically has, in her teens, has a very angular face. So she's got extremely pronounced wide cheekbones, and her eyes are somewhat sunken and a wonderfully wide set eyes. So where the focus starts, where the focus of this lens is absolutely pristine, are her eyes, and she's staring straight at the camera. So there's no difference in sharpness between her left and right eye. And I'm like, well, did I ever do that on any of my photos? And I went back to every single 6x7 photo, whether it was Mamiya, whether it was the Pentax 6.7. is it something about this macro lens where it's a close focusing macro lens where he can make sure that's the first item? And this is where I'm just going to, repeat something extremely simple and obvious, but there is something to be said where the eye is perfectly in focus first, and the out of focus areas lead off from there and trail off from there. And what I've noticed so many times, I mean, I'm not talking about using a modern Sony with eye detection. I'm talking about shooting analog, using manual focus. I've often gotten the eyebrow perfectly in focus. I've gotten some of the eye, good enough in focus. But what really popped out on this was just the eyes are perfectly in focus. And I started going back to so many other Peter Lindbergh shots from the 90s, and that is true of almost all of them. If the shot had really strong, if the shot was intended to have really strong focus, and again, this could be the shots that he did shoot in medium format, because in 35 millimeter, he encouraged a soft focus sometimes. He liked the accent. He liked that action, that feel of like he's moving along with the model. When the model is in somewhat of a pose, and again, I'm assuming, Peter Lindbergh is making really comfortable contact with them on a tripod, sitting down, having a conversation, finding the shot, waiting to go through those 10 shots, stopping, having the assistant bring over another medium format, preloaded. The first thing is just the eyes. So that's, to me, that is a technique of Peter Lindbergh, not exclusive to him, but just an incredible appreciation. Back in the analog days, you wouldn't know necessarily that you nailed that focus. You would just have to assume it was there until you got the contact sheet back. The other thing that I really believe makes this photo so perfect is that this is specifically on a technique wise. Again, I have an 8.5 and 11 print right in front of me, is the amazingly perfect fall off of the sharpness. I hesitate to just use the word bokeh here because that's not really, like, we're not looking at like bokeh balls and glittering things in the background. The background is just a wooden barn, but it's the incredible gradations in tone and in fall off of the sharpness that is exquisite. So basically, it starts with Kate Moss's level eye. Well, actually, her eyes are just a tiny, like the posture of her head is still a tiny, infinitesimal amount of a lean. So she's got an absolutely infinitesimal lean to her left side. As you look into the grain and into the sharpness, it's still there underneath her eyes. It is still there for part of her nose. But once you hit her cheekbones and look down at her jawline, it begins to get softer. Obviously, her mouth is a bit more in focus, so it has a little degree of front. So then that really depends on. Now, if he did shoot with the 135, that is an f4 version. That's an f4 lens. That's as wide open as it gets. So let's assume he's shooting at f4 on this 135 macro. Where it is so freaking gorgeous is the way it then falls out of focus as you see her neck and part of her bare shoulder, and yet the clothes she's wearing start to reappear in focus. So yeah, it's this freaking ballet of focus and soft focus and perfect focus, all blended with this absolutely true and inimitable Kodak Tri-X at its peak, And again, like the version that I'll leave a link to where you can see where it's Peter Lindbergh's print, sold. There were 3 limited edition prints. I'm sure this was still done up somewhat in a darkroom. Obviously, like any brilliant master printer, in whether it was the darkroom print from the 90s or the revived darkroom print when he sold these things, either way, I'm sure they did a little bit of dodging and burning or some degree of contrast and control. But what came straight out of camera is so obvious. There's absolutely zero retouching in this shot. And it's a perfect marriage of just a portrait that both is definitive in some ways, but still so mysterious. It's still so mysterious. I can tell when you look, and I'm not like some huge Kate Moss fanatic, but I've always been curious about her, especially her rock and roll side and things that happened with her life in the 90s. You know, she was kind of an icon going around with Johnny Depp and hanging out with Hunter Thompson. But there is just something here where it seems so unposed in a way. Like it just seems like, and especially I would love to see the original contact sheets of this. The contact sheet that came up in this article, it's again, this incredibly low resolution version of 4 different shots from the medium format roll. And there were probably several medium format rolls, but the one that they focused on here has, Kate Moss sort of angling her body a little bit more, and in a couple of the other shots, she's really slouching a bit more. But in this one, yeah, she's just very, very, very casually addressing the camera a little bit more, and just leaning into the photo a little bit more. So yeah, I think that trying to, as the name of this episode goes, trying to unlock a perfect portrait, for me with this particular one, is so interesting because it's based on such simplicity. It's a Kodak Tri-X. There is no extra lighting going on. It just looks like open shade. And it's just a young model staring at the camera, So that's the part where you're like, okay, the tools are so available for anyone. Anyone can pick up a medium format lens and pick up a Kodak Tri-X. The lighting is absolutely available to everyone. But something happened here in this particular shot that I think just absolutely transcends the scenario. It transcends the scenario. And what was that scenario? Just doing an editorial spread for a freaking fashion magazine. And the other pictures in the editorial are fun and they're cool and they have a vibe. But then suddenly you see this one and it's like, where did this come from? This one stands out so much more. And it's just aged so wonderfully. And obviously, if you do Google Peter Lindbergh, you're going to find this shot. If you look at any book for Kate Moss, this one will always come up. So anyway, that was me trying to break into the mystery behind this photo. So takeaway is, yeah, what about that 135? So I found this guy on eBay last week at a ridiculous price. The seller did not even throw any tariff things at me, because of course the only place to find this lens is going to be Japan. Again, this is the Macro 6.7 135 f4. Found it for $79. It's supposedly in near mint condition. I haven't even put it on my camera yet. I'm waiting for a day where I could possibly do some test portraits, and I'll let you guys know, see how it goes. I'm not, I want to see if I'd like to base what I really should do is load another roll into have 2 shots, basically, like one roll with the 135 at f4 and another roll with the 105 at f4, and maybe begin to figure out some of those differences, some of that difference in focal length and some of that difference with this maximum sharpness. Yeah. So anyway, hope it inspired you guys. Hope you guys enjoy.